Hi there, my name is Liz Magnanti, and I am from the Birdhouse in Rochester, New York. And today we're talking about the cardinal, or the Northern Cardinal, which is a favorite of many bird watchers. They're a beautiful bird, and they're quite easy to attract to your backyard. So let's get started talking a little bit more about them. First of all birds are going to be in the class Aves, so that's any kind of bird you can find in the animal kingdom. The cardinals are in the order Passeriformes, which are going to be the songbirds, which are common in our backyards, and their family consists of cardinals, grosbeaks, and tanagers. So they're in the family called Cardinalidae, and in that family you'll also find this bird here. This is the rose-breasted grosbeak. And it's pretty obvious when you look at their beak, how you can see that family resemblance. They both have that large beak that's really nicely shaped for cracking open large seeds. The cardinal is in the genus Cardinalis, and the species is also Cardinalis. There are a couple other cardinal species in the genus Cardinalis, so they do have a couple relatives. You're not going to find them in the area that we are in. If you're in the upstate New York area, you won't find these guys here. But if you go out west towards Arizona, New Mexico, or Mexico, you might find this brownish bird that almost looks like a female cardinal, but a little bit different. This bird is called the Pyrrhuloxia, and that is a cardinal relative. And then there's also the beautiful vermilion cardinal, which is found further down south in Colombia and Venezuela, and that's on the left there. They are bright red, and they have a much larger crest than the northern cardinal that we are familiar with. So these are the two other species you can find in that genus Cardinalis, and you can definitely see the family resemblance there, both in the beak, the body shape, and that nice crest they have on the top of their head. So cardinals don't migrate, so they tend to stick in the same area all year round. They're really well adapted to urban and suburban environments, and they're originally a southern bird. So originally they were found further down south and not in the New York area, but over the past 150 years or so, their populations have dramatically increased, and they're pushing northward, and they continue to do so. So it's projected that they'll continue to gain their habitat and gain their range as we go on. Part of that being because they are just so well adapted to human environments. And as the human population expands and goes into new territories, the cardinal comes with them. So cardinals are 8 to 9 inches long. They're slightly smaller than a robin. They've got a wingspan of 10 to 12 inches. All birds are going to be quite light compared to their size because they are all feathers. They've got hollow bones, so they really don't weigh too much. So a cardinal only weighs about 1.6 ounces. And they're sexually dimorphic, meaning the males and females look different from one another. The male cardinal, which you are pretty well aware of, you can find them pretty easily when you're out bird watching. Bright red. They've got that distinct black mask that covers their face, and then they have that crest as well on the top of their head. And that crest, they can be raised and lowered. They will do that as a sign of territoriality or to help attract a mate. So they can lower that crest, but a lot of the time you'll see it pointing upwards at least a little bit. And then they have that large red bill. The females also have that large red bill and a black mask, although it's not as distinct as the males do. But they're brown. They've got red tips on their crest and on their feathers and on their tail feathers, but they do look quite a bit different than the males. And then the juveniles look similar to the female, but if you take a look at their coloration, they tend not to have as much red on their wings and on their crest. And their crest tends to be shorter, and then their bill is going to be black or gray. And if we look back at the female cardinal, they have that bright orange bill. So that's one way you can identify the juveniles from the females. And the juveniles will have that gray to black bill for about 60 to 80 days until they start getting more of their adult plumage and colors in. So cardinals have a varied diet. They are very reliant on seeds. So if you are trying to attract cardinals to your backyard, putting out safflower seeds, black oil sunflower seeds, and striped sunflower seeds are going to be their favorite. Safflower is great because larger blackbirds like grackles aren't going to eat it, but the cardinals really, really love it. And also, squirrels tend not to like the safflower seed as well. So you can't go wrong with safflower seed. Black oil sunflower will give you a great diversity of other birds as well besides cardinals. And the striped sunflower is a larger sunflower seed that can be tough for some birds to crack it open if they have a small bill. But because cardinals have that nice big bill, they can easily crack open striped sunflower. So giving them all those seeds or a combination of a couple of them will definitely help increase your chances of getting cardinals in your yard. They will also eat insects, especially in the spring and summer when the insects are plentiful. They'll feed the insects to their young. And then as we get into the colder months, the fall and the winter, they'll still eat the seeds, but then they also will rely more on fruit. So fresh or dried fruit like dogwood, sumac, mulberry, hackberry, raspberry. So if you have bushes or trees in your yard that are berry producing, keep an eye out for cardinals come the fall or the winter. Same with cedar waxwings. You might see them coming to your bushes as well if they're berry producing. Cardinals tend to be ground feeders, so they will feed mainly on the ground, but if you have bird feeders out, you might find them perching on your bird feeders, especially if they have a nice platform space for them. Cardinals are a larger bird, so if you have a little tube feeder that just has smaller stick perches on them, that's going to be too small for them to land on. So you want a tube feeder that has large perches on it, like this picture here on the left. This is a feeder called the Big Tube by the Aspects Company. If you have a feeder right now that is just a small tube with small perches, you can always add a tray to the bottom of that to give the cardinals more room to perch. Or you can always do a platform feeder, which is the picture here on the right, and that gives the cardinals plenty of room to perch. So having that nice open space is great for them to be high up off the ground where they're away from predators like cats especially, because if they tend to feed on the ground more, they can be susceptible to getting picked off by predators, especially with that bright red color. So platform feeders are great, especially if you can raise them up a little bit. Cardinals do have different songs. So they're one of our earlier calling birds. They tend to start calling pretty early in the season, and then they'll sometimes go all through the summer. Their different songs can sound like birdie, 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 or what, or cheer, cheer, cheer. And here's some examples of them. So they will sing a varied amount of songs, and each individual can have 10 to 12 different song types. So the males tend to attract more females if they have more song types. So just like a mockingbird, the bigger their repertoire, the more success they have in finding a mate. They'll start singing early, usually in March or April, to establish their territory and start attracting those mates. And they'll sing well into the summer. They have a really well-developed voice box called the syrinx that allows them to sing these varied and complex songs. Now, what's interesting about cardinals is that female cardinals also sing, and they're one of the only North American female songbirds that do that. They will sometimes sing also while sitting on their nest, and they tend to have longer and more complex songs than the males. I have a recording here of a pair singing a song, and in this recording, the female will be singing first. So cardinals not only sing through August late into the summer, but they will sometimes start as early as January or February, not singing their full song, but singing what are called sub-songs, so partial parts of their call. They'll start practicing for the breeding season coming up. It's the first songs that young cardinals learn, these little sub-songs, so you might hear them doing a few chips or a few tweets of their full song just to start practicing. And interestingly enough, and this happens with other birds as well, not just cardinals, but there are things called regional dialects with these birds. So some cardinals or birds in other regions will sound differently in the north than they will in the south. So they can sound differently depending on where they are. There are also what are called chip calls, and chip calls are a non-musical alarm call that is used to, most of the time, have some kind of an alarm signal or to show some kind of aggression. And here's an example of a chip call. So you might find if you're going out in your yard to refill the feeder and the cardinal is out there and you flush the cardinal away, they start to kind of yell at you with their little chip call. And that's pretty common. So cardinals can be also quite territorial, especially during breeding season. Their territories tend to be about 2 to 3 acres in size. And when they have established their territory, it is pretty common for them to defend it. So that means they'll scare off other birds, especially other cardinals. And sometimes you might even see them attacking their own reflection. So here's a picture of a cardinal going after its reflection in a rearview mirror. They're also well known to attack their reflections in glass. If you've got glass windows, they might just keep hitting the window. And really the only thing you can do is block the reflection some way, either by putting out decals or taping some paper to the window so they can't see their reflection. Sometimes you can put up holographic tape and that will scare them away. And it can last for a couple of weeks, but as their hormones subside, the attacks tend to end. And as those hormones subside and as you get more into the fall and winter months, they become very unterritorial and they will form mixed flocks with cardinals and sometimes other birds as well, especially in the winter time. You might see this at your feeder. You have a whole bunch of different cardinals. They get along just fine with each other in the winter, but as those hormones start to ramp up during breeding season, they start to disperse. So during mating, males and females will form really strong bonds, and they tend to stay together all year. And sometimes they will do what's called aloe feeding, and the male will feed the female cardinal. And you might see this in your backyard. They'll go to the feeder, grab some seed, and then feed it to the female. And that's just one way for them to form a more stronger pair bond. So males and females do form strong bonds and tend to stay together all year. But even that being said, studies have shown that between 9 and 35% of the young from a female mating with one mate will come from another male. So this happens a lot in the bird world where there is a lot of genes being passed around with the different animals. So even if they do have this strong pair bond, that doesn't mean that they're only mating with the one bird. They tend to mate with several other mates, even if they do have that pair bond. Cardinal nests are 4 to 5 inches in diameter, 2.5 to 3.5 inches tall, and they're usually pretty low off the ground, 4 to 8 feet off the ground or so, but they've been found as high as 40 feet high off the ground. They're known to nest in more than 50 different types of trees and shrubs, and predation rates tend to be the same no matter where they nest. So they don't have much more success in one place than another. And this just goes to show why they are so successful and why their range is expanding so well. They can nest in a variety of different places and in different types of trees and shrubs. They've got a lot of options to choose from. And studies have shown that cardinal success rates are better in suburban areas compared to rural and wilderness areas. So they just thrive in human-dominated environments. They tend to choose protected, concealed places to build the nest, and the female will build the nest. The male sometimes brings in some nesting material, but the female does most of the work, and she will sit on the eggs, and she's more of that brownish color, so she'll blend in a little bit more, so she's not as obvious when she's sitting on the nest. And this is pretty common with most birds, that the older and more experienced they are, the stronger their nests are, and they usually have better success in their breeding success. So their eggs tend to hatch and those young tend to survive better than younger birds that don't have as much experience. In general, cardinals will use plant stems, grapevine, bark to build their nests, and they'll line them with fine grasses and dried leaves. It takes about 3 to 6 days to complete that nest, so it doesn't take too much time. Cardinals can have 1 to 3 broods per season, and they tend to have more broods with fewer eggs in the southern regions. On average, there's 3 to 4 eggs per brood, and it takes 12 to 13 days for those eggs to hatch. After hatching, it only takes 9 or 10 days until those young are big enough to leave the nest. The male will bring food to the chicks and the female during this time, and as the young grow older, the male will stay and feed the fledglings. And this is what one of the young looks like as it leaves its nest. So they don't look quite like the adult. They still have their brown plumage and they are lacking a crest. So they can be hard to identify, but this is a young just fledging from its nest after 9 or 10 days. In general, cardinals will live for 5 to 6 years, but they've been known to live over 15 years. So it can be quite varied. And once most songbirds have survived a year, they tend to be able to survive for quite a bit longer for their full life expectancy. Cardinals have those bright red feathers, which come from the food they eat, but they don't ever molt that bright plumage. So the males will always be bright red, even when it's not breeding season. And because of this, they tend to be targeted by predators over the females. They're just this bright target. Sometimes they will even molt their feathers on their heads all at once. This isn't too uncommon, so you might see a bald cardinal in your yard, and this is common. The cardinal isn't sick, it's just molted all the feathers in its head, and in about 10 days or so, those feathers will come back and the cardinal will be just fine. There are different color morphs that cardinals can have as well. This yellow cardinal was a big hit in Alabama a couple of years ago, and it's just lacking some of those red pigments that would give its feathers those colors. So just lacking some pigmentation, which makes it look yellow. There's also something called Leucism, where they are lacking pigments totally. This isn't being albino per se, because they do still have quite a bit of color on them, but they do lack pigments in some of their feathers, causing these white patches. So this is kind of common with birds as well. You might see a cardinal or a robin with a big white patch on them, and this is called leucism or being leucistic. This is a different type of color morph as well. This is a bilateral coloration difference. This is called Genandromorphism, and it's a rare abnormality, so you're probably not going to ever see this. But what it is it causes the female plumage on one side and male plumage on the other. So they look right down the middle. One side looks like a female, one side looks like a male. Very, very rare, but it does happen. And this was captured in 2019, November of last year, in Texas, this at a banding station. So in general, if you want to attract cardinals to your yard, they can be quite easy to attract. Just make sure you have a nice large feeder out with large perches. Tray feeders work the best. Sunflower and safflower seed are their favorites, and make sure to keep those feeders high, clear off the ground from predators. If you plant berry producing plants and shrubs, that will help them keep coming all year round, even in the wintertime. So if you have any questions, feel free to visit our website, thebirdhouseny.com. And until next time, enjoy your birds.